Kirk's death highlights growing political violence in this country and the never-ending debate over gun control. Michelle Nix getting reaction from state lawmakers on both sides of the aisle.
Shocked, appalled, and political violence just should have no place in our free democratic society.
A gunman's bullet tragically ended the life of conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Now the deadly shooting has Democratic and Republican lawmakers from Northeast Ohio and nationwide coming together, calling for an end to escalating political violence, saying it's not the answer. In July 2024, President Donald Trump was shot in an assassination attempt before the general election. In June of 2025, Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband Mark were killed in a targeted attack at their home. And in a related attack, Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman and his wife were shot and wounded. Now Kirk murdered as he shared his views on a college campus. Republican State Representative Bill Romer shared this photo of Kirk when they ran into each other at a political fundraiser just 2 weeks ago.
Started at a very young age creating Turning Point USA, went to college campuses when he was told nobody on a college campus will listen to a young conservative, and grew a whole movement. And the fact that he was killed for doing that is a true tragedy.
2 seconds into my speech, that's why I'm attacking.
19 News pulled video from our archives from October of 2017 when Kirk was invited to speak on the Cleveland State campus. But some say the shooting death of Kirk is a tragic reminder of another escalating crisis in this country: gun violence. Democratic Senator Casey Weinstein says we must look at gun safety reforms because the gun control debate won't end until the violence does.
The wide accessibility and availability of guns and assault rifle-like weapons puts us all at risk.
But Republican Representative Romer says the gun control debate has to wait as a country mourns.
Really, right now, what we want to do is think about Charlie's wife and children and mourn them, mourn his loss, and then there will be plenty of time in the future to explore that.
Reporting in Cleveland, Michelle Nix, 19 News.